Hi everyone, I'm Paula. Welcome to my channel where I give you insightful English grammar lessons to improve your knowledge of English. In today's lesson, we will be talking about who, whom, which, and that when they are used as a relative pronoun. What is a relative pronoun? A relative pronoun is used to relate one clause of a sentence, the independent clause, to another part of the sentence, the dependent or subordinate clause. It is used after the noun in the sentence to introduce the subordinate or dependent clause to the independent clause in the sentence. The subordinate clause that the relative pronoun introduces is called a relative clause. What is the relative clause? The relative clause follows the relative pronoun. It is a dependent or subordinate clause and it gives more information about the noun. The relative clause may be defining or non-defining. Let's examine this diagram in a sentence. Here is the man who will be our teacher. The independent clause is here is the man. It is independent because it can stand on its own. Will be our teacher is the subordinate clause. Who is the relative pronoun that relates the independent clause to the subordinate clause. It follows the noun man that is in the independent clause and introduces the subordinate clause, which is now the relative clause. The relative clause gives more information about the noun. Let's look more closely at the relative clause. The relative clause follows the relative pronoun. That means it comes after the pronoun in the sentence. The relative clause is a dependent or subordinate clause. That means it cannot stand on its own. On its own, you would not know what the writer intends for you to understand. The relative clause gives more information about the noun and it begins with the relative pronoun. So it tells you more about the noun, which is something or someone. The relative clause may be a defining relative clause. That means it gives information that is necessary, or it may be a non-defining relative clause. That is, it gives information that is not necessary to the reader or listener. The sentence can do without it. Let's look more closely at defining and non-defining relative clauses. Defining relative clause is also called restrictive clause. It provides necessary information and helps to identify the noun. Non-defining relative clause, also called non-restrictive clause, provides additional information, but that information is not necessary. It can be omitted from the sentence. Here are some examples. The book that is on the table belongs to the new student. That is a relative pronoun. Is on the table is the defining relative clause. It identifies the noun book. Our next example, the organizer requested the names of all the persons who attended the seminar. Who is the relative pronoun? Attended the seminar is the defining relative clause. It identifies the persons. Our last example. This is my sister whom you spoke with yesterday. Whom is the relative pronoun and you spoke with yesterday is the defining relative clause. It tells us about the noun sister. Now for the non-defining relative clause, which is also called non-restrictive clause, it gives additional information, but that information can be omitted from the sentence without affecting the meaning of the sentence. It is offset by commas. Let's look at our first example. The book, which is old and tattered, belongs to the new student. The relative pronoun is which, and the non-defining clause is which is old and tattered. You will notice that it is offset by commas. It gives more information about the noun book, but that information could have been deleted and our sentence would still make sense. Our next example is the boy who was carelessly riding his bike did not see the pedestrian. Who is the relative pronoun, and who was carelessly riding his bike is the non-defining relative clause. If we remove that clause, our sentence would not be affected. And our last example of non-defining relative clauses is the principal whom we like very much will be moving to another school. The relative pronoun is whom, and the non-defining clause is whom we like very much. It is offset by commas and could be deleted without affecting the sentence. So there you have it. You now understand the difference between a defining relative clause and a non-defining relative clause. So let's get back to relative pronouns. When do we use who, whom, which, and that as a relative pronoun? We use who and whom when we are referring to people. They are used for defining and non-defining clauses. Let me tell you a little trick. An easy way to decide whether to use who or whom is to substitute he, she, or they for who, which is a subjective pronoun, and substitute him, her, and them for whom, which is an objective pronoun. I recommend that you watch this video, which gives a full lesson on who and whom. Our next relative pronoun is which. Which is used when referring to animals and things. Which is used for non-defining clauses only. And our last relative pronoun is that. That is used when we refer to people, animals, and things. That is used for defining clauses only. You may notice that the relative pronoun that may be used for all three categories: people, animals, and things. Let's look at some examples. Who. Who can be used for both defining and non-defining clauses. Who functions as the subject of the sentence. It performs the action. Here's an example when who is used as a defining clause. The student who studies hard will succeed. Who studies hard will succeed is the defining clause. Now let's look at who when it is used as a non-defining clause. My sister, who lives in London, is visiting for the holidays. Who lives in London is a non-defining clause. It provides additional information, but that information is not necessary. It is offset by commas. Now let's look at some examples using the relative pronoun whom. Whom can be used for both defining and non-defining clauses. Whom functions as the object of the sentence. It receives the action. Here's an example of whom when used as a defining clause. She was the last person whom I wanted to see. Whom I wanted to see is the defining clause. The defining clause cannot be removed from the sentence. If it is removed, the sentence would make no sense. And here's an example of whom when used as a non-defining clause. The artist whom we met at the gallery was very friendly. Whom we met at the gallery is the non-defining clause. If we removed whom we met at the gallery, our sentence would read, the artist was very friendly. Let's now look at how we use the relative pronoun which. Which refers to animals and things. It is used only for non-defining clauses. Here's an example when we use which to refer to things. The painting which I bought many years ago is now worth $1 million. Which I bought many years ago is a non-defining clause. It is offset by commas. It provides more information about the painting, but that information is not necessary. The sentence could have been written without it. And here's an example of when we use which to refer to an animal. The dog which won the contest is very friendly. Which won the contest is a non-defining clause. Without it, our sentence would still make sense. The dog is very friendly. We use the relative pronoun that to refer to people, animals, and things. It is used only as a defining clause. It cannot be removed from the sentence. Here's an example when that is used to refer to people. I had a friend that could sing very well. That could sing very well is the defining relative clause. Now for an example of when we use that to refer to an animal. Dogs that assist persons with disabilities are called guide dogs. That assist persons with disabilities is the defining relative clause. And when do we use that to refer to things? Here's an example. I saw a chair that had only 3 legs. That had only 3 legs is the defining relative clause. As you have seen, we may use different relative pronouns for different categories. We may use who, whom, and that when referring to people, which and that when referring to things, and also which and that when referring to animals. But how do we decide which relative pronoun we should use for each of these categories? Let's start with people. For people, we may use who, whom, and that. Who uses defining and non-defining clauses, and it functions as the subject. Whom uses defining and non-defining clauses and functions as the object. That functions only as the defining clause. In this segment, we are going to determine which is the correct relative pronoun to be used in each category. So our first sentence is, the teacher likes students who or whom or that are honest. Who, whom, or that are honest is a defining clause, so all 3 relative pronouns could be used. But how are we to decide which one is correct? Who is a subject pronoun? It performs the action, so right away we know that we may take out whom. Another way to determine if who or whom is correct is to substitute they for who and them for whom. They are honest is correct. So now we are left with who and that. Who and that are used in defining relative clauses, so they are interchangeable. both can be used. So our sentence would be, the teacher likes students who are honest, and also correct would be, the teacher likes students that are honest. Our next sentence is, the teacher who or whom or that is new at the school likes honest students. This sentence has a non-defining relative clause. Who or whom or that is new at the school. Which one is the correct relative pronoun? We may remove that because that is used only in defining relative clause. We are now left with who or whom. Let's do our trick to see which pronoun fits. We will substitute he for who and him for whom. He is new at the school or him is new at the school. He is correct, so our relative pronoun is who. So our sentence reads, the teacher who is new at the school likes honest students. Here's another sentence. This is the teacher who or whom or that you met yesterday. This sentence has a defining relative clause. Who, whom, or that you met yesterday. Which one is the correct relative pronoun? We may use that because this is a defining relative clause. Let's now decide whether we should also use who or whom. We will substitute she for who and her for whom. You met she yesterday or you met her yesterday. Her is correct, so the correct relative pronoun to use is whom. This is the teacher whom you met yesterday. Now let's see when we may use which and that for animals. Which is used only in non-defining clause and that in defining clause. Our first sentence is, the goat which or that ate my flowering plants is still roaming in the garden. Which or that ate my flowering plants is a non-defining clause. So right away we know that we should eliminate that. That is used only in defining relative clause. So which is the correct relative pronoun? The goat which ate my flowering plants is still roaming in the garden. Our next sentence is, there is a goat which or that ate my flowering plants. Which or that ate my flowering plants is the defining relative clause, so we may eliminate which. Which is used only in non-defining relative clause. So our sentence is, there is a goat that ate my flowering plants. Let's now decide on the category for things. When do we use which or that? Our first sentence is, my cottage, which or that is by the beach, is in need of repairs. Which or that is by the beach is a non-defining relative clause, so the correct relative pronoun to use is which. My cottage, which is by the beach, is in need of repairs. And our next sentence is, here is Tom's cottage, which or that needs some repairs. Which or that needs some repairs is a defining clause, so the correct relative pronoun to use is that. Here is Tom's cottage that needs some repairs. Let's do a quick recap. The relative pronouns are who, whom, which, and that. Who and whom are used for people. Which is used for things and animals, and that is used for people, things, and animals. The relative pronoun follows the noun in a sentence and introduces the relative clause, which is a subordinate clause that gives more information about the noun. It may be a defining clause that gives necessary information, or it may be a non-defining clause that gives additional information that may not be necessary. The non-defining clause is always offset by commas. Well, that's it for this lesson. I hope you found it useful. If you have not as yet subscribed to my channel, please may I ask you to do so now and turn on the notification bell so that you won't miss any of my lessons. Thank you so very much for joining. See you next time. Bye-bye.